Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're not at the homestead, but instead are going on a field trip. We're going to meet Don Hayes at the Salem Village Parsonage site. It was at the village parsonage that Samuel Parris and his wife Elizabeth lived in 1692 with their 3 children, their son Thomas, who was age 10, their daughter Elizabeth, also known as Betty, who was age 9, and 5-year-old daughter Susanna. Also in the household was Parris's 11-year-old orphaned niece Abigail Williams and the slaves Tituba and John Indian. In February in 1692, Betty Parris and her cousin Abigail Williams began having fits described by John Hale, the minister of the nearby town of Beverly, as beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural disease to affect. The Parsonage Foundation was uncovered in 1970 by local Danvers historian Richard Trask and a team of archaeologists and volunteers, including Don Hayes. The site was named a historic landmark in 1988, and today it is owned by the town of Danvers. This is where it all began, so let's talk to Don about the parsonage and how it was uncovered.
Good afternoon, Don.
Good afternoon.
So we're here with Don Hayes, and this is the Parris, what was it, parsonage?
I call it the Salem Village Parsonage, but it's where the Reverend Samuel Parris and his family lived, including his niece Abigail Williams, his daughter Elizabeth, and their friend Ann Putnam. Of course, he held the slave from the Caribbean, Tituba, who told the girls her tales about witchcraft connected with her religion of voodoo. And that's basically where the whole story begins, is within these walls here.
What about, before we begin, can you a little background about yourself? You're retired?
I'm a retired professor of history, taught for 50 years. I'm a charter member of the Danvers Alumnus Company, which now owns the Rebecca Nurse Homestead, but my experience with witchcraft tragedy didn't begin there. It began when I went to university at Salem State. I met Richard Trask, we became good friends, and he gave me a grand tour of all the witchcraft sites of Danvers when we were still in college. Nice. And in 1971, when he began to really seriously research this location, he called me early in the summer of 71 and said, I've got an archaeologist coming down. Why don't you come down with us? The archaeologist was Roland Wells Robbins of Lincoln, who was then the only archaeologist specializing in American colonial historical sites. He did the Saugus Iron Works, for example. So he came down here and surveyed the site and got us working on doing test holes. And he had these T-shaped probe rods. And if you stick a probe rod into the ground and it goes, and you don't go any further, you know it's been undisturbed and you don't want to be bothered with that. You go until you find soft soil, and then you know that's been disturbed. So we went all over this, the two of us young guys in those days, and found soft soils in this area. And then we began the test holes and going east and west, north and south, just holes. And finally, we came across a situation in that far corner over there, the far left-hand corner, where we had hard pan and then we had soft soils. And it was the end of the day, so Roland says to us, next Saturday, because we were doing this on Saturdays, you guys come down and you dig here. So the next Saturday we came down and we dug there, and we found that corner. And the exciting thing about that corner is that those rocks are cut-faced rocks, which means they're not 17th century. But Richard's research had showed that in 1734 they had put on an addition to the back of the house.
And when you say, you know, you went down, it was hard and then soft, so basically you were way out by where the fence is, hard. And then when you finally get to where what looks like a pit to me here, that's when it became soft.
Yeah,
and you knew you had something.
That area was soft soil, yep. And so when we didn't know what we'd found. because we were brand new to this. But he came, Roland did, and he was very excited because we'd found something.
And who's Roland?
Roland Wells Robbins. He did the Saugus Ironworks, one of the first colonial digs that we ever done in the United States. He did Shadwell, Jefferson's home site where he was born, and various other sites all over New England and the South.
So he's an archaeologist.
Right.
Okay.
Right. He also did, I think his important claim to fame was having found the house site for Thoreau on Walden Pond. That's what got him started.
Nice.
So he sent us over to this direction, to the south, because all these houses face south. If that addition's on the back, then the front must be over here. And we found that corner right there. So, and that has fieldstone foundation, which is typical 17th century. And so from there, of course, if we had that corner, then you come this way, which is to the east, I believe, yes. And you find the rest of the house. There are stone footings where these pillars are now, but they've been covered. The records also indicated that there was a lean-to. And the lean-to was off the back of the house, off the kitchen. And when I came down here one Saturday, Richard was all excited, and he handed me this piece of metal plate. Of course, it was a pewter plate, rounded across the top, but it had in it stamped SEP, which was the best indication we had that this was the Parris house site. So it was found by a 5-year-old boy. Children have very sharp eyes, and he picked it up and gave it to Richard. So that's in the archives at the Danvers Historical Society, which basically funded this. And then Richard raised money by publishing a little book and articles he wrote for Yankee Magazine and some other magazines too. So then Robbins called in a backhoe and pulled the soils out. And the reason is that in 1784, they tore down the house. It was in poor condition. And carted the wood away to make a house over in this direction, and then used this as a dump. And most of what we found were bones, mostly pig bones, because that's what colonials ate. The pig has a lot of little ones in a litter. Some cow, some chicken, but those animals provide milk and eggs, so you don't eat them until you have to. So we spent the next 2 summers sifting soils and finding the artifacts, and of course doing a lot of talks. And we had the channel, CBS News came down and did a vignette on us. So it was rather kind of an exciting time to be an historian with your hands in the dirt and getting dirty.
Yeah, sure, right?
Yeah.
Now, just for context here, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you kind of alluded to it, we're in the middle, basically, of all these homes.
Yeah.
Right? So all these modern homes, right, are all surrounding here. And with just I think you called it a cart path coming in?
That's right. It was a cart path just for this house. That was typical. It's typical of farmland even today. There are cart paths going down to the fields from the main house to get from place to place. Yeah, this was all open farmland at one time.
Yeah.
Even in the 1890s, when the photograph was taken of this supposedly as the site, that was open farmland then. Danvers hadn't been built up as it is after World War II.
Now, you don't have any idea what there's like a little patch of ground that's in between the two.
Well, that's because the foundation in the house stood here, and they wanted to put an addition on. But to dig the foundation, they just dug a separate one.
Yep.
So
that would have been covered by the house.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be a big
way. There may have been a chimney there too. I don't know.
Yeah.
We found tons of bricks, but I don't know exactly myself where the chimney undoubtedly, the main chimney would have been here, actually, in the center of the house, because first you build. In a 17th century house, you build one end, and you build 2 floors with the chimney. Yeah. Then you build the other end.
So
that was basically used as a cold cellar for storing cooked food.
Yeah. So this is where it all began.
This is where it all began. This is where the stories were told, where the girls began to have their visions and their fits, and they began to name people. Of course, they picked on the homeless people, the lowest level of society first, because they had the least defense. Sounds familiar. Human nature hasn't changed much in the last 400 years. So that explains pretty much what went on here.
So, and they were pretty superstitious bunch of people. So why do you think that they, believed in witchcraft and that type of thing?
Well, it was part of their religion, part of the Christian religion. King James himself, when he commissioned his new Bible, he had two purposes. One was a Bible that would prove he had the right to be king from God, the divine right of kings, that's called. And the other was, he insisted there had to be something in the Bible about witches because he believed that they existed. He considered himself to be an expert in finding fake witch exposers. He wanted the real exposure of witches. He was deathly afraid of them. So the bishops, when they translated, found a section in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that said, "Thou shalt not suffer a murderer to live." Well, witchcraft is a form of murder, so they changed the word from murder to witchcraft. And so it became embedded in the Christian religion. I believe that's been changed since then.
But this is...
and of course, witchcraft was the superstition in Europe. It wasn't just the English.
No, right.
It was everywhere in Europe.
Yeah. And it seemed like any little noise out in the woods, they were afraid of. And, of course, you had the Native Americans attacking and all that type of stuff. And I think at that point the charter may have been revoked. There was a lot of friction. They were waiting for it, weren't they? Yeah.
A lot of friction between England and the colonies at that point. And without a charter, you don't officially own any of the land. And the land is what made you, gave you your survival.
Yeah.
You grew food, basically.
Yeah.
You didn't go shopping for it. You grew it.
Pretty much everything you had to do yourself.
Yeah, right.
So this all started, Richard started this whole thing. He wanted to find this site. So he went out and he did research in the archives.
Right.
This is the way he did it.
Well, there wasn't an archive then. He went to the...
state?
Basically, he created the archives that this town now has by getting the town to actually fund one. But the records for the first parish church still exist, and they were available. They were made available, plus town histories and so forth. He did a lot of work, and I think we ought to mention that Richard is the town archivist, as well as a local noted historian and an expert on the videography and the photography of the Kennedy assassination.
JFK. Yep.
So
I know he does have a book out about the JFK, and he is one of, I guess you could say, one of the leading authorities on the witchcraft.
He is.
The Salem witch trials.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's interesting. So how? I wouldn't even know how to begin. So you go through the records. I mean, what indications were there that this was the location? I mean,
well, in the church records, the parsonage was owned by the church and maintained by the church, and they paid the minister.
Yep.
He was the highest paid man in the town. So these records are either in the town records or they're in the church records. So he could just go through that stuff. And it takes effort because, they wrote everything by hand.
Yeah.
And you had to adjust your reading to everybody's handwriting. And then there were differences in the language and differences in the word over 300 and 400 years.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to learn the vocabulary that they use and understand what they were trying to say. So that's how basically you begin with your research. Even Roland Robbins said that with the other sites. You begin with your research, the oldest documents in the town, and you go forward from there. And then you go to your site, your potential site, and as I described, you do a survey, you try the soils, you dig the test pits, and then you might find something. If you do, you keep on going.
So they had so correct me if I'm wrong, they had the early records from the parish, right? And then they could tell, because the parish doesn't own this land anymore, or any land around it, so they can see year by year who's buying what, who owns what. So they can trace it all the way back to say, okay, and I think you said that the house right there was
this one over
Hubbard?
here, Hutchins.
They
are an old Danvers family, and that's why they gave permission for us to do this work here, and eventually gave the land to the town, so it's a public site.
Gotcha.
Right.
So you could narrow it down. You have a theory that it's back here, so you come in and do some testing, and sure enough, and I think you said this whole area was basically wooded at the time.
No, that was wooded over there.
Was wooded
this
over
was
there.
an open field where the kids played football.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
And then, it was nothing we see here was there. It just looked like ground.
It was just covered. It was just going on ground over this. You don't nothing was visible until we excavated it.
And that must be an amazing feeling when you start to dig that and you're saying, "Oh my gosh, look at this! We actually found it."
Yeah. It was an exciting time. Yeah. And I took photographs, and I've used it in my lectures and during my 50 years of teaching, because it was like my second year of teaching that this happened.
Oh, no kidding.
So I've been using it ever since.
Fresh out of college?
Fresh out of college.
Really?
Both of us, yeah.
And I'll tell you, even for archaeologists, I mean, doing something like that, it's not every day you get this with the significance of this. I would think, right?
No, you don't.
I mean, it's not the pyramids, but it's not it's not some clay pipes in someone's backyard either, right?
That's true. And this particular event, this witchcraft tragedy, plays itself out in other ways, such as in the 50s with the witch hunt on the communists, and it goes on and on, even within families sometimes,
Of course, and even today we have the expression we're on a witch hunt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really affected, which makes sense. And you and I have talked about it too, how history can move in centuries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What happened centuries ago, we're still living with today.
Yep.
And
we're on a continuum. There's no question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Anything else? Can you think of anything else?
No, not at the moment. On the way home, I will.
Yeah, that's right. That's when we'll do it.
So we'll do it again.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Didn't even know this existed. And I've been with Danvers now for, 20, 25 years?
Yeah, at least.
Didn't even know this existed.
Yeah, there you are.
I mean, let me say that differently. I knew something like this was out there, but I didn't realize, first of all, I didn't realize the history of you and Trask coming out and doing this. It's like, oh my gosh. But this is fascinating to me. So thanks again.
Yeah, I was lucky that I met him at the university.
Yeah.
And, we clicked because we had the same interests.
Yeah.
And getting the call to come down here, I got an archaeologist, and then spending at least 2 years, I've kind of forgotten whether it's 2 or 3, sifting soils and working on this it was an amazing experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and again, especially for someone coming fresh out of college, starting a teaching career. Yeah. All right. Well, we shall see you.
All righty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So that was it. And don't forget to subscribe and check us out on Patreon. Thank you.